Alright, family, sit down, because what just detonated inside the corporate spine of the music industry is not a rap beef. It is not a diss track. It is not a subliminal Instagram jab. What just happened is a full-blown execution, dressed in a tailored suit, signed on a boardroom table, and stamped in red ink across the entire hip-hop economy. And by the time you finish watching this, you are going to understand why every executive in every glass tower in Manhattan, Miami, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and London is quietly locking their office doors and canceling their weekend plans. Because Curtis, 50 Cent, Jackson did not just fire another shot at Rick Ross. He built a machine. He built a machine that eats careers. And Rick Ross just walked into it, wearing a bespoke suit, on a Tuesday, with the whole culture watching in high definition. Now hold on a second, because I know what you are about to say. You are about to say, this is just the same old feud. This is 2008 Officer Ricky nonsense. This is two grown men who should have moved on a decade ago. I hear you. I hear that argument. But you have to understand something, and I am going to say this loud enough for the back of the room to hear it. The 50 Cent who came for Rick Ross in 2008 does not exist anymore. That guy? He was a rapper. The 50 Cent standing over Rick Ross' industry-wide carcass in 2026 is not a rapper. He is a media mogul with distribution deals attached to his name at Netflix, Starz, Lionsgate, and multiple international content marketplaces. He is on speed dial with executives who could not name 3 Rick Ross singles. He is in production meetings where the phrase unit economics comes up more often than the phrase Hot 16. And the man he just moved on is not the same Rick Ross who dropped Trilla and Deeper Than Rap either. That guy? He had label backing. He had radio. He had a chart. The Rick Ross bleeding on the floor right now is a legacy artist with a 2001 week album, a tour selling under 20%, and you are going to want to sit down for this one, a debt portfolio that was quietly bought by his worst enemy. I have the paper trail to prove it. I have the venue reports. I have the corporate filings. Stay locked in, because what surfaced in a Florida corporate registry filing at 5:45 Eastern today rewrites the whole map of who owns hip-hop. And it does it without a single new verse being recorded. Not one. Not a bar. Not a hook. Just a stamp, a filing fee, and a lawyer with a black pen. Let me set the stage properly, because if you do not understand how the ground shifted under Rick Ross' feet, none of what comes next is going to hit the way it should. Deeply strange things have been happening around Maybach Music Group for the past 90 days, and nobody in mainstream music press connected the dots until now. Rick Ross rolled out his 12th studio album with the confidence of a man who still thought he was 15 years younger. He built the campaign around a global orchestra tour, hardwood arenas, dinner jacket branding, private jet flex reels. Rick Ross positioned this as his imperial return. And for about 72 hours, the mythology held. Then the first week numbers leaked. Under 2,000 pure sales. You read that correctly. Under 2,000. A man who used to move 180,000 out of the gate is now moving less than a suburban SoundCloud artist with a viral TikTok. And that number leaking into the internet was not the disaster. That number leaking into a specific email inbox, the executive inbox at G-Unit Film and Television, was the disaster. Because Curtis Jackson has been sitting on this file for 17 years, waiting for the exact set of coordinates the universe just handed him. You feel me? Because this is where most people get it wrong. Most people think 50 Cent is petty. He is not petty. He is patient. That is the distinction that Rick Ross missed for a decade and a half. 50 Cent has been building leverage in silence. Rick Ross has been posting jet keys. And when the venue reports started coming in, arenas at 19, 20, 22% capacity, front row seats being papered with buy one get one half off promo codes, Curtis Jackson did not laugh. Curtis Jackson closed his laptop, walked into a legal meeting, and gave a single instruction. Not a diss track. Not a meme. An instruction. And in that instruction, the entire music industry landscape started to reroute around Rick Ross like water routing around a rock in a river. Because 50 Cent does not need to beat Rick Ross on a song anymore. Curtis Jackson has been in the business of buying floors, the ground you stand on, the ground you walk on, the ground you sign contracts on. And when you own the floor, the man standing on it is already yours. He is already inventory. He is already an asset on somebody else's balance sheet. He just does not know it yet. So here is where it turns. On Tuesday morning, before most executives had touched their first cup of coffee, a series of confidential legal notices went out from Curtis Jackson's corporate counsel to the boards of directors of 3 major distribution networks, 2 international venue conglomerates, and 1 dominant streaming platform. The letters were not threats. The letters were reminders. Reminders that G-Unit Film and Television's multi-year, multi-title production pipeline, which is currently underwriting a not insignificant portion of the streaming and premium cable ecosystem, could be reevaluated in the event that these same partners continue to distribute, promote, host, or amplify Rick Ross' catalog and touring calendar. Read that sentence again slowly, because the phrasing is doing more work than a diss track ever could. He did not ask them to drop Rick Ross. He asked them to choose. And when you are a boardroom sitting on a 9-figure content pipeline with Curtis Jackson on one side and a 2001 week album on the other side, that math is not a math problem. That math is a formality. There is not an executive in that building who is going to protect Rick Ross tour dates at the cost of their own production slate. Not one. Now let me pull back the curtain on what happened next, because the speed of the collapse is the story here. By 10 in the morning that same day, an internal memo leaked out of a major international venue booking agency. 3 arena dates on Rick Ross' European and domestic tour route were placed on administrative hold pending, quote, a full operational and financial risk assessment. Venue underwriters cited insufficient advanced ticket velocity and elevated operational liability, which is the polite corporate way of saying, we are not eating a loss on a man Curtis Jackson just informally blacklisted. The dominoes were not staggered. The dominoes were simultaneous. Streaming playlist placements began quietly disappearing from Rick Ross' new album by lunchtime. Programming executives stopped returning calls. Radio spins that were locked in for the weekend went unlocked. Sync deals in active negotiation went suddenly cold. And by 2 in the afternoon, William Leonard Roberts II had gone from headlining boss to industry contagion. From a name on a marquee to a risk on a spreadsheet. From a brand to a cautionary line item in a Monday morning risk review. That is not a spin. That is the timeline. That is what 6 hours of Curtis Jackson's corporate leverage looked like in the marketplace. Curtis Jackson took his victory lap on camera. He does that. He always does that. And this time the lap was cinematic. A photograph, Curtis Jackson seated at the head of a long mahogany conference table, 6 executives in tailored suits flanking him, a leather portfolio open in front of him, a single fountain pen resting on the top page like a punctuation mark. Caption underneath, 7 words, I told y'all I was cleaning house. Then the follow-up post, 30 seconds later. Nobody is booking the fake boss. Labels don't want him. Venues don't want him. The bots got flagged. Pack it in, Ricky. The ride is over. I want you to feel the surgical precision of that language for a second. Not the ride is done. The ride is over. Present tense. Declared. Final. Curtis Jackson was not predicting Rick Ross' collapse. Curtis Jackson was narrating it in real time. And the culture, the same culture that watched Rick Ross wear the biggest boss title for 15 years, did not defend him. It piled on. It piled on hard. Because the optics were catastrophic. For a decade and a half, Rick Ross told us he ran boardrooms. And in one afternoon, Curtis Jackson demonstrated who actually walked into them, sat down at the head of the table, and closed the door. That is not a diss. That is a demotion. And emotions do not get undone with a diss track. Let me take you inside the promised land estate in Georgia, because what happened there in the next few hours is the human core of this story. Sources close to Maybach Music Group describe a scene bordering on organizational panic. The road manager was on one line. The distribution rep was on another line. Event promoters in 5 states were on hold. The catering vendor for the European leg was asking whether to refund. The insurance carrier on the tour bond was asking for updated capacity projections in writing before the end of business. And in the middle of it, Rick Ross himself, silk robe, cigar, cell phone in one hand, laptop in the other, trying to hold the mythology together while the mythology was actively being repossessed. Ross did what Ross does. He went live. He hit Instagram, camera up, jaw set, and delivered a rant that under any other circumstance would have been iconic. He accused Curtis Jackson of running to white executives to shut down black art. He accused Curtis Jackson of using dirty Hollywood tactics because Curtis Jackson could not touch him on wax. He called Curtis Jackson an informant in a suit, a line that would have gone viral in a different decade. But this decade did not care. This decade watched a man in a silk robe defend an empire that was already being liquidated behind his back. And that is a hard visual to recover from. You cannot argue your way out of a repossession by rapping louder. Now, follow me here, because this is the part most creators are going to miss. The blacklisting was not the story. The blacklisting was the smoke. The fire was underneath the whole time, and Curtis Jackson lit it 7 years ago. At 2:30 in the afternoon, an entertainment reporter published a bombshell that stopped the entire industry in its tracks. Leaked communications between a high-ranking executive at a major distribution conglomerate and Curtis Jackson's legal team revealed the actual mechanism of the takedown. Curtis Jackson's investment group, a quiet vehicle registered under a chain of corporate shells stretching through Delaware, Wyoming, and the Cayman Islands, had, over the past several years, been acquiring the distressed debt portfolios of a former distribution partner that Maybach Music Group signed with in the early 2010s. In the kindest reading of the documents, Curtis Jackson bought the debt as a passive investment. In the worst reading, and this is the reading the leaked emails support, Curtis Jackson bought the debt for one reason and one reason only: to position himself as Rick Ross' legal creditor. Not his rival. His creditor. And that word matters. A rival can be outwrapped. A rival can be outtoured. A rival can be outpromoted. A creditor can only be paid. And this is where the ground cracks. Because if you are Curtis Jackson's investment group and you hold active liens on Rick Ross' original distribution obligations, then every single dollar Rick Ross' new album generates, every stream royalty, every touring settlement, every catalog sync, every t-shirt sold in the merch line at the end of the show is legally subject to garnishment the moment it hits Maybach Music's accounting pipeline. Read that again. Rick Ross was not just losing money on the album. Rick Ross was making money for Curtis Jackson on the album. Every stream, every playlist ad, every arena seat, every ringtone in a country you never toured in. Every penny. The check was not going home to the promised land estate. The check was crossing town to G-Unit's finance office. And Curtis Jackson knew it before he sent the first letter. That is why he sent the first letter. He was not trying to bury the album. He was trying to inflate the garnishment. He wanted every dollar to arrive in his name. That is the sentence that turns a beef into a business model. Curtis Jackson posted the punctuation mark himself. A short clip. Private jet. Champagne flute. Laughing so hard he had to wipe his eyes. I own you, Ricky. I own you. Every time somebody plays a song off that flop, the check comes to me. Thank you for the 2,000 sales. I'll take my cut on Friday. The internet did what the internet does. It converted the tragedy into memes inside 11 minutes. Rick Ross in a G-Unit polo, name tag reading Employee of the Month. Rick Ross clocking in at a G-Unit office. Rick Ross Wingstop uniform edited into a G-Unit uniform. A photoshopped W2 with Curtis Jackson's signature at the bottom. The biggest boss brand, a brand Ross spent 20 years engineering, protecting, and monetizing, was pulverized in a single news cycle. And this is the terrifying part. The pulverization was not the pain. The pulverization was the anesthesia. The actual pain, the real financial injury, is the fact that Rick Ross now has to choose between performing the album and not performing the album, and both choices are losses. Perform, and Curtis Jackson gets paid. Do not perform, and the venue overhead and tour bond costs eat him alive. This is what a checkmate looks like in a modern corporate boardroom. There is no move that is not the wrong move. Every square Rick Ross can step on is a square Curtis Jackson already bought. Every direction he faces, there is a lien. Every step forward is a garnishment. Every step backward is a default. This is the geometry of a corporate execution, and Curtis Jackson drew the map. You want to know how a Maybach music strategist described the situation privately? He said it out loud on the phone with a business affairs lawyer at 3 in the afternoon, and it leaked within the hour. He said, and I am quoting directly, "We are not fighting a beef anymore. We are fighting a hostile takeover, and we brought a diss track to a debt collection." That line is going to end up in a business school case study one day. Wharton is going to teach it. And somewhere in the back of the classroom, a 22-year-old with a rap dream is going to hear it and finally understand why the paperwork matters more than the punchlines. Because that is the sentence that captures the entire imbalance. Rick Ross prepared for a rap war. Curtis Jackson prepared for a corporate war. And the moment the two strategies met in the marketplace, one of them stopped being a strategy and started being a target. Rick Ross did not lose this fight in 2026. Rick Ross lost this fight in 2011 in a conference room he never attended, on a document he never reread. Now here is where it gets darker, because Rick Ross' team did what any cornered organization does. They filed. Late in the afternoon, Ross' legal team announced an emergency federal lawsuit alleging tortious interference, predatory corporate harassment, and illegal restraint of trade. They asked a federal judge for an immediate injunction against Curtis Jackson's debt enforcement mechanism. And on paper, that is a reasonable move. On paper, that is what any competent legal team does. But paper does not know Curtis Jackson. Paper cannot warn you. Paper cannot flinch. Paper only knows what it was drafted to know, and Curtis Jackson's paper was drafted by attorneys who have been quietly preparing for this exact filing for years. Because Curtis Jackson's legal counsel responded with one sentence. One sentence. Just one. And that one sentence froze the entire Maybach music war room. Quote, "We welcome the litigation, as discovery will require Rick Ross to submit 10 years of unedited tax returns and offshore financial records under penalty of perjury." End quote. Let that sentence sit in your chest for a second. Because that sentence is not a legal response. That sentence is a nuclear deterrent. Curtis Jackson is not saying, "We will beat you in court." Curtis Jackson is saying, "We will open your books in court, and everything you spent 20 years hiding will become a matter of public record." For a man whose entire brand is built on the perceived scale of his wealth, discovery is not a legal risk. Discovery is an existential risk. If the tax returns say what the industry has whispered for a decade, that the promised land estate is leveraged, that the Wingstop franchises are on a co-signed line, that the jet is a lease, that the offshore accounts are not what the raps say they are, then Rick Ross does not lose a lawsuit. Rick Ross loses the mythology. And in hip-hop, the mythology is the collateral. There is no comeback from a discovered bank statement. Because the moment those documents hit the docket, they hit the internet, and every A&R, every promoter, every festival buyer starts pricing Rick Ross the way you price a used car with a title problem. All right, family, take a breath. Because we're about to talk about the piece that turns this from a hostile financial siege into a full historic corporate hostile takeover. This is the piece that is going to keep music lawyers awake for the next 6 months. At 5:45 Eastern this afternoon, a corporate registry filing surfaced out of the state of Florida. A newly formed investment group, organized under a Delaware LLC, registered agent in Tallahassee, filing counsel in Miami, submitted a formal buyout offer for the full Maybach Music Group trademark, portfolio, and catalog rights. The filing states the investment group has already acquired a controlling interest in Maybach Music's underlying debt obligations from a mix of institutional lenders and secondary market debt buyers. And if Rick Ross defaults on his upcoming liability payments, which, given the tour freeze and the streaming audit, is not a hypothetical, that is a Tuesday, the investment group is positioned to convert the debt into equity, ownership, brand, catalog, masters. The whole thing. The whole ecosystem. The whole 17-year story, priced at the number on a foreclosure docket. And I want you to sit with that valuation for a second. Because the number on a foreclosure docket is never the number the artist thinks the empire is worth. The person selling is never in the room. The person buying is never emotional. And the price is always, always lower than the mythology. Read the next detail slowly, because this is where the room goes quiet. The principal managing director listed on the corporate filing is a high-ranking corporate attorney whose day job is chief legal counsel at G-Unit Film and Television. Which means the vehicle acquiring Maybach Music is not a passive investor. The vehicle acquiring Maybach Music is a strategic acquisition arm directly aligned with Curtis Jackson's personal corporate structure. Curtis Jackson is not just blacklisting Rick Ross from the music industry. Curtis Jackson is trying to legally purchase the empire that made Rick Ross Rick Ross. If the buyout goes through and given the debt position, the timing, and the venue collapse, if is doing a lot of light lifting, Curtis Jackson will own the Maybach Music Group name, the back catalog, the master rights, and by extension, the branding infrastructure of everything Rick Ross has released since 2009. He will own the logo. He will own the trademark. He will own the tour name. I want you to sit with the moral weight of that for a second. Rick Ross' name is not just an artist name. Rick Ross the brand is an ecosystem. Meek Mill signed to that ecosystem. Wale signed to that ecosystem. Stalley, O'Malley, Rocky Fresh, a generation of artists routed their careers through the Maybach music brand. And if Curtis Jackson owns the trademark, Curtis Jackson owns the branding rights on every project stamped with that logo. Retroactively. And this is where the industry started whispering the word that no executive wants to say out loud, precedent. Because if this works, and it is working, then the model of the corporate hostile takeover of a hip-hop label just got proven. It just got a case study. And every legacy artist with a leveraged catalog just felt a breeze on the back of their neck. Now hold on. I want to give the counterargument its full airtime, because you deserve both sides. There is a legitimate camp, a serious camp, not a trolling camp, that says Curtis Jackson has just weaponized private capital in a way that threatens every independent black-owned label in the game. If a media mogul can quietly buy the distressed debt of a rival, engineer a public revenue collapse, and then flip the debt into ownership at the moment of default, then no independent label is truly independent. That is not paranoia. That is Wall Street. That is what leveraged buyouts have been for 40 years. What is new is watching it happen inside hip-hop, in real time, with the executioner giving the play-by-play from a private jet with a champagne flute. And whether you cheer it or you condemn it, you have to acknowledge the shift. This is not the same industry it was on Monday morning. Something structural moved. And structural moves do not move back. This is the difference between a bad news cycle and a paradigm change. A bad news cycle heals. A paradigm change rewrites the textbook. The other camp, Team Curtis Jackson, and it is a large camp, argues something different. They argue this was earned. They argue Rick Ross had 17 years to sharpen his corporate game the way Curtis Jackson sharpened his, and instead chose to sharpen his catering budget. They argue that boasting about ownership on wax for a decade and a half without actually holding structural equity is exactly the kind of costume that eventually gets torn off in a boardroom. They argue that Curtis Jackson did not cheat. Curtis Jackson read the game. And the difference between reading the game and getting read by the game is the difference between owning your masters and finding out your masters were collateralized by a partner you forgot you signed with in 2011. Both camps are correct on their own terms. Both camps miss the deeper story. Because the deeper story is not Curtis Jackson versus Rick Ross. The deeper story is that hip-hop just crossed a threshold. For 30 years, the culture told itself that beefs were about bars, that respect was about catalog, that legacy was about influence. In one afternoon, Curtis Jackson demonstrated that the currency has changed. The currency is not bars anymore. The currency is corporate leverage. And if you have not been building it, you do not have it. And if you do not have it, then a man who has been building it for a decade in silence can arrive at your door with a portfolio and a smile and a stamp and a lawyer, and you will not have a move. You will not have a friend in the room to make a call for you, because the person who owns the room is the person who bought the room. And Curtis Jackson has been quietly buying rooms since the vitamin water deal closed in 2007. Let me pull you back inside the promised land estate for one more scene, because I have sources placing the mood at the compound as of the last 2 hours. Rick Ross has gone quiet. The Instagram lives have stopped. The Silk Robe monologues have paused. The team is in a closed-door meeting with 2 law firms, one civil, one criminal adjacent, reviewing whether there is any procedural door that can be shut on Curtis Jackson's investment vehicle before the trademark filing enters its next hearing window. There is talk of a preliminary injunction. There is talk of an emergency federal filing. There is talk of a settlement from a man who has told us for 15 years that he does not settle. Meek Mill has been on the phone with the team all afternoon. Wale has not commented. Stalley posted a Bible verse and deleted it 40 minutes later. Floyd Mayweather posted a laughing emoji from a yacht, which honestly should be considered a form of legal notice in itself at this point. And Curtis Jackson, according to a source inside G-Unit, is sleeping like a man who has been waiting 17 years to sleep like this. You feel the weight of that sentence? 17 years. Curtis Jackson did not spend 17 years planning revenge. Curtis Jackson spent 17 years building the infrastructure so that when the moment came, revenge would not require effort. It would require a signature. That is the terrifying part of this whole story. Curtis Jackson did not have to work today. Curtis Jackson had to sign today. The work was done between 2008 and now, quietly, off camera, off the podcast circuit, off the diss track cycle. And the reason nobody saw it coming is because Curtis Jackson does not narrate his construction phase. Curtis Jackson only narrates the demolition phase. And by the time the narration starts, the building is already down. That is not luck. That is a doctrine. And doctrines, unlike beefs, scale. Doctrines get applied to the next target, and the target after that, and the target after that. And this is where the ground cracks the second time. Because a second set of documents surfaced in the last 90 minutes, and I am watching this in real time as I record, indicating that Curtis Jackson's investment group has also been in preliminary contact with a major streaming platform regarding a licensing renegotiation covering the entire Maybach music back catalog. The renegotiation, if executed, would restructure the royalty flow on every historic Rick Ross album under the label, from Trilla to Rich Forever to Mastermind to Port of Miami, under new ownership terms. In plain language, Curtis Jackson is not just trying to buy the label. Curtis Jackson is trying to retitle the historical catalog. Every song, every guest verse, every hook Wale sang, every bar Meek Mill rapped under that logo, every ad-lib Ross buried in a mixdown 12 years ago in a Fort Lauderdale studio. If the renegotiation closes, the entire commercial history of Maybach Music Group would be listed under a Curtis Jackson-controlled entity. And that is not a takeover. That is a rewriting of the historical record. That is Curtis Jackson editing the credits of a 20-year run and putting his name on the closing frame. Drop your verdict in the thread below, because the culture is genuinely split on this one, and I want to hear where you land. Is Curtis Jackson the most strategically ruthless executive hip-hop has ever produced? Is Rick Ross a cautionary tale about talking ownership without building ownership? Is this the moment private capital finally cracked open the last independent corner of the music business? Or is this, and this is the argument I want you to steelman for me in the comments, is this the payback Curtis Jackson has been owed since 2008, delivered with the precision of a man who understands that the loudest revenge is the one that arrives in a manila envelope? I want to see your take. I want to see the raw take. Not the polite take. The raw one. The one you would say on the phone to your best friend at midnight. That is the one I want in the thread. Now let me answer the question I know you're typing right now, because I am watching the comment section move in real time. You're asking, can Rick Ross survive this? And I have to be honest with you, because you deserve honesty, not spin. The financial answer is complicated. The optical answer is not. Financially, Rick Ross has assets. He has real estate, he has franchises, he has income streams outside the Maybach Music Trademark. He is not a poor man. That is the trapdoor Rick Ross fell through this week, and nobody in his camp has a ladder long enough to reach him. Let me widen the lens one more time, because I owe you the historical parallel. There is one other moment in hip-hop history that comes close to what we are watching. In the mid-2000s, when Master P watched his no-limit empire get eaten alive by distribution disputes and tax liens, the culture called it a personal failure. It was not a personal failure. It was a structural failure. Master P built a brand faster than he built the corporate frame to hold it, and when the frame gave out, the brand went with it. Curtis Jackson watched that unfold in real time as a young artist coming up. Curtis Jackson took notes. Curtis Jackson learned the exact lesson the industry hoped nobody would learn, that the death of a rap empire is almost never the music. It is almost always the paperwork. And Curtis Jackson has been reverse engineering that lesson into a weapon for 2 decades. What you are watching this week is not a beef reaching its climax. What you are watching this week is Curtis Jackson delivering the finished version of a thesis he started writing in 2003. There is one more piece I have to give you before we close, and this piece is the piece that changes what you thought this video was about. Because up until this moment, the story has been Curtis Jackson versus Rick Ross. That is not the whole story. The whole story is that Curtis Jackson has just written the playbook for the next decade of hip-hop corporate warfare, and every executive at every major label is downloading that playbook right now. Sources at 2 competing labels confirmed on background that internal memos went out this evening instructing legal teams to audit exposure to legacy artist catalogs currently held under co-signed distribution agreements. Read that sentence twice. Because what that memo says, in plain English, is check who owes what to whom and check whether Curtis Jackson's model could be executed against our artists too. Curtis Jackson did not just take down Rick Ross. Curtis Jackson taught the industry that the takedown was possible. And there are at least 8 legacy artists, I will not name them tonight, but I will name them in the next breakdown, whose catalog structure looks eerily similar to what Rick Ross looked like on Monday morning. 8 men who used to sleep well. 8 men who are not sleeping tonight. 8 men whose lawyers are drafting the same emergency memo Rick Ross lawyers were drafting 6 hours ago. And here is the part that should chill you all the way through. Because I've been on the phone for the last 3 hours with people I trust, and every single one of them told me the same thing in different words. This was never about Rick Ross. Rick Ross was the demonstration. Rick Ross was the pilot episode. Rick Ross was Curtis Jackson proving the concept to a room full of investors who now have a case study, a template, and a proof of concept. And once you have a template, you do not stop at one target. You stop when you run out of targets. Which means the next 12 months in this industry are not going to look like the last 12 months looked. The next 12 months are going to look like a season of a corporate crime drama that Curtis Jackson himself would executive produce. Because in a way, he already is. All right, family, we are landing this plane, but I need you to stay with me for 30 more seconds, because what happens over the next 72 hours is going to be everything. If a federal judge signs the injunction Rick Ross team filed this afternoon, the entire debt garnishment mechanism gets paused, and Curtis Jackson has to slow down. If the judge denies the injunction, the trademark buyout window opens, and the Maybach Music Group name changes hands before the end of the fiscal quarter. That is the fork in the road. 2 outcomes. 1 binary decision by a single federal judge in a Florida courtroom. And whichever way it lands, the shockwave hits every catalog owner in this business. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise. Do not let a single podcast host frame this as a personal beef, because that framing is a lie of omission. This is a leveraged buyout wearing beef clothing. That is the whole trick. That has always been the whole trick. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is not slowing down for anybody. Turn on the notifications, because we have sources placing the injunction hearing sometime in the next 48 to 72 hours, and I will not sleep until I have the ruling for you the moment it drops. I am watching this in real time. I have people inside 3 of the parent companies. I have people inside 2 of the legal firms. I have a friend who works catering at the venue where the emergency Maybach meeting was held tonight, and I know exactly what time the last car left the parking lot. And the second the courtroom moves, we are moving with it. Part 2 of this breakdown is already in production. Part 2 is where I name the 8 other legacy artists whose catalogs may be next. Part 2 is where I break down the offshore corporate structure that Curtis Jackson's investment vehicle is actually built on, layer by layer, entity by entity, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Part 2 is where I show you the 7-page contract clause from 2011 that made every dollar of this possible. Because once you see the diagram, you are going to understand this was never a beef, and this was never going to be anything except this. Drop your verdict in the thread. Did Curtis Jackson finally deliver the 17-year receipt, or did he just weaponize private capital against Black-owned music in a way we are all going to regret? Did Rick Ross deserve this, or did the culture just watch a public execution dressed up as a rap feud? Did the industry get exposed, or did it get taught? I am reading the comments tonight. I am replying to the best takes personally. Tell me who wins. Tell me who loses. Tell me what happens to a culture that just watched a man buy his rival's empire and stamp his name on the front door. Because whatever you think the answer is, I promise you the truth is going to be uglier, sharper, and more historically consequential than anything you have seen in this business in 20 years. And I will be the one telling you when it lands. Stay locked in. Stay sharp. Stay skeptical. And whatever you do, do not blink, because in this industry, the blink is where the empire changes hands, the boss becomes an employee, and the 17-year receipt finally gets stamped paid.